Hello, welcome to this issue of Discovering Truth at the Movies. Hi, my name is David Lance. Today we're going to continue with this episode of the Chronicles of Belteshazzar, Chapter 3, in which Grandpa begins to tell the story of Daniel in Babylon to his four grandsons. Now, the boys learn about the Assyrian and Babylonian empires in a battle that was fought at a place called Carchemish, north of Israel. In this episode, I'll ask the question, how can we be good role models to our children? The whole concept of the Chronicles of Belteshazzar is built off of the movie The Princess Bride, in which a grandfather reads a book to a sick grandson who is stuck at home and can't go to school. The book that I'm working on is conceived to be for kids roughly in the grades 4th through 9th grade. That's about ages 9 through 15. So if you've got children or grandchildren in that age group, I encourage you to have them follow along. I want to ask you to consider joining me as I read each chapter about every other week on Thursdays and provide some commentary to the whole thing. I'll be reading one chapter at a time, and I'll include a question for reflection. I'll also post these episodes on my podcast, Discovering Truth at the Movies, and I hope to eventually publish this as a regular book. Well, with all of that as introduction, let's begin with Chapter 3. The story begins. Matthew and Josiah were already in the sunroom when Isaac walked in fresh and clean from his bath. Nai had taken Gabriel down the hall to build a castle with some Legos, as she and Grandpa both knew that he wouldn't last for story time. As the three boys settled in, Grandpa faced them, his back to the sunroom windows that let in lots of sunlight during the day. The boys could see the sun setting through the large windows. Josiah and Matthew sat on a small couch against the wall and with two armchairs on either side of the couch. Isaac scrambled into the chair furthest from the door to the room. Nai came in right behind him with popcorn and sodas for everyone. Grandpa had a flannel board on which were several characters. On one wall was a map of the ancient Middle East. On another wall were pictures of mountains and an ancient city with funny-looking pyramids called ziggurats. On a podium in front of Grandpa was an ancient-looking book. As he turned to face his grandsons, Grandpa held the book up to show it to the boys. "All right," said Grandpa, "I know you've all read the story of the prophet Daniel in the lion's den in the Bible. What I want to do tonight is present you with a sort of play. We'll use characters on the flannel board, we'll use Bible verses, but we'll also use our imaginations to think about what life was like in those days. This special book that I have in front of me will help to transport us back to the time of the prophet Daniel. It's a special book, and this is the only copy in the world. Do you know what the book's called?" All three boys shook their heads with no, eyes fixed on their grandfather. Josiah was the only one who spoke up. "What's the book called, Grandpa?" "It's called The Chronicles of Belteshazzar," intoned Grandpa as he raised his arms and looked up to the ceiling. "And through the magic in this book, we will be transported to the time of the prophet Daniel to see and hear and smell what happened to him." "Well, I hope Daniel didn't fart like you fart, Grandpa," Matthew blurted out. "I think I'm going to go check on Gabriel now and leave the four of you to the story," said Nai as she left the room while trying to stifle a laugh. Acting as though he'd not heard Matthew's comment, Grandpa walked over to the map of the ancient Middle East and turned to the boys as he faced them there in the sunroom. 3,605 years ago, a really important battle was fought at a place called Carchemish. It was on the Euphrates River north of the nation of Israel. It was on an ancient trade route that explorer Marco Polo traveled when he journeyed to China. Grandpa walked back to the flannel board and pulled out several figures to put on the board. Now, there were three nations that were involved in the battle at Carchemish. The Assyrians had controlled this part of the world for nearly 100 years. Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, had come to help the Assyrians fight off the invading Babylonian army that was commanded by King Nebuchadnezzar. There was a terrible battle that was fought there. The Babylonians defeated the Egyptians and the Assyrians. Pharaoh Necho and what was left of his army fled south back to Egypt. With the Egyptian army defeated, no one was able to stand against the invading Babylonians. Grandpa looked down, took down the commanders of the Assyrians, Egyptians, and Babylonians and put up a picture of Jerusalem and her king Jehoiakim. And then he moved to a picture of an army up beside the walls of Jerusalem. News of the Babylonians spread throughout Palestine. Now, Jehoiakim was the king of Judah, and he lived in Jerusalem. One day, the Babylonian army showed up outside the walls of Jerusalem, and guess what happened? All three boys were chewing on their popcorn. Isaac looked at the picture of Jerusalem, the Babylonian army, and King Jehoiakim standing at the wall. He loved hearing about the battles and the wars. What, Grandpa? With a smile on his face, Grandpa raised his finger to signal that they must wait a moment, and then he left the room. I want to share a personal reflection. In a movie called Meet the Robinsons, we see a way to deal with failure and to keep moving forward. I remember when I was in my early 30s and I felt like a total failure as I had attempted to start a newsletter and consulting business and it had totally gone bust. One of the few things that I had gotten a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction out of was coaching my son Jason's soccer team. At the time, he was about 7 years of age. Now, I coached various sporting teams for all three of my children, but my son Jason, when it came to soccer, was a natural athlete. I know that during that time, when my career was in the tank, so to speak, coaching his team was a key experience that helped me to keep moving forward. Over the years, Jason went on to play soccer at the high school and the college level, and he also became the athletic director at several of the schools where he's taught. One year, I even got to coach my grandson Isaac's soccer team along with my other son Joshua when Jason's family was living close to us. That to me is the greatest thing about family, to be connected to the ones that you love and be involved in their lives. As a grandfather, leaving a legacy for my grandchildren is one of the most important things that I feel that I can do at this stage in life. If you're facing challenges in your own life, especially in this time of COVID and all the things that are happening in the economy, let me encourage you to view this opportunity of spending time with your family as an area of life to pursue so that you too can keep moving forward. I want to share with you a poem that I learned a long time ago that goes with this idea. You see, there are little eyes upon you, and they're watching night and day. There are little ears that quickly take in every word you say. There are little hands all eager to do everything you do, and a little boy who's waiting for the day he'll be like you. You're the little fellow's idol. You're the wisest of the wise. In his mind, about you, no suspicions ever rise. He believes in you devoutly, hopes that all you say and do, he will say and do in your way when he grows up, just like you. You see, there's a wide eyed little fellow who believes you're always right, yet his ears are always open and he's watching day and night. You are setting an example in all you say and do for that little boy, that little girl, and yeah, those little brothers who are waiting to grow up to be just like you. Well, the question for reflection that I'd like to leave you with today is how can we become good role models for our children? Well, that concludes this episode of Discovering Truth at the Movies and Chapter 3 of Chronicles of Belteshazzar. To sign up to access the latest chapter, you can go to a website that I've got here on the screen if you're watching it as a video, or if you're listening to it as an audio podcast on my podcast, there will be a link in the episode description. When you sign up, I'll send you my free monthly newsletter, Conversations with the Culture, as well as access to a little ebook that I've created called Discovering Godly Leadership at the Movies, with my thanks. And to sign up for my podcast, simply visit David Lantz, that's Lantz .podomatic.com. Well, until next time, thanks so much and God bless.